There comes a moment in life when the prayers feel like they hit the ceiling and fall back down, when words leave your mouth but never seem to reach heaven, when the sky remains quiet no matter how desperately you whisper or cry or beg. It is in those moments that people ask the most dangerous question of all, the question they are often afraid to say out loud: what if God is silent? Not distant, not angry, not punishing, but silent. And if God is silent, does that mean he has left, or does it mean something far deeper is happening that we were never taught to understand? In the Bible, some of the strongest believers did not hear God when they needed him most. Job lost everything and cried out for answers, yet heaven remained quiet. David wrote psalm after psalm asking why God had hidden his face. Even Jesus himself, hanging on the cross, spoke the words that have shaken humanity for centuries: my God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God experienced silence, what makes us think silence means abandonment? What if silence is not absence but preparation? What if the quiet moments are not punishment but transformation unfolding beyond what words can explain? There is something unsettling about silence because it forces us to confront ourselves. Noise distracts, answers comfort, clarity reassures, but silence strips everything away. Silence removes explanations. Silence removes timelines. Silence removes control. And yet, in Scripture, God often moves most powerfully in silence. Elijah did not find God in the earthquake, or the fire, or the wind, but in a still, small voice so quiet it almost went unnoticed. How many people miss God not because he is gone, but because he is whispering while they are demanding thunder? Modern neuroscience tells us something fascinating. When the brain is overwhelmed with uncertainty and unanswered questions, it goes into survival mode, seeking patterns, explanations, and reassurance. Silence feels threatening because the mind equates it with danger. But silence is also where the brain rewires itself. Studies show that moments of stillness activate deep reflection, emotional processing, and long-term behavioral change. What science calls neuroplasticity, spirituality has always called transformation. Could it be that the silence of God is the space where faith evolves from dependence into depth? People often believe faith means constant reassurance, but real faith is forged when reassurance disappears. When miracles pause. When prayers echo unanswered. When time stretches longer than expected. Abraham waited decades for a promise. Joseph sat in prison forgotten. Moses wandered 40 years before purpose unfolded. Waiting was not wasted time, waiting was the process. What if the silence is not God delaying the answer, but God building the person who will be able to carry it? Across cultures and spiritual traditions, silence has always been considered sacred. Buddhist monks sit in silence not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening beneath the surface. Indigenous traditions speak of the listening earth, where wisdom comes not through speaking but through stillness. Ancient mystics believed silence was the language of the divine, because words are too small to contain eternity. If God is infinite, how could he be fully expressed through noise alone? Here is a surprising truth most people never hear: silence is not empty. In physics, even a vacuum is alive with unseen energy. In music, silence between notes is what creates rhythm and emotion. Without pauses, music becomes noise. In the same way, without silence, faith becomes shallow repetition. What if God's silence is the pause that gives meaning to the melody of your life? Psychologists have observed that the most profound personal growth often occurs during periods of perceived abandonment, loss, or confusion. When external guidance fades, internal awareness awakens. People who survive dark nights of the soul often emerge with stronger purpose, deeper compassion, and unshakable clarity. Not because the pain was good, but because it forced them to listen differently. Could it be that when God seems silent, He is teaching you how to hear beyond words? There is a hidden danger in always receiving answers immediately. Answers can make us dependent. Silence makes us resilient. Answers can end questions. Silence invites transformation. A child asks for help constantly, but an adult learns through struggle. What if silence is not rejection, but graduation? What if God's quietness is a sign that you are being trusted to walk forward without constant instruction? People often confuse faith with feeling. When they no longer feel God's presence, they assume He is gone. But feelings fluctuate, truth does not. Love does not disappear because emotion fades for a moment. In relationships, silence does not always mean disconnection. Sometimes it means comfort, familiarity, and depth. Sometimes it means growth. If God is love, could His silence mean a deeper form of closeness than emotional reassurance ever provided? Here is something deeply unsettling yet liberating. Growth often feels like abandonment before it feels like purpose. Seeds grow underground in darkness before they break the surface. Muscles tear before they strengthen. Butterflies dissolve into nothing before becoming something new. Transformation requires a phase where the old form no longer works, but the new form is not visible yet. Is it possible that you are not being ignored, but transformed in ways that cannot be rushed? Many people stop praying when God feels silent, but silence is not the end of conversation. Silence is an invitation to listen. Prayer was never meant to be a monologue. Silence trains discernment. Silence teaches patience. Silence reveals hidden motives. When the noise stops, you begin to notice the quiet truths you were avoiding. What if the silence is not God speaking less, but you finally being ready to hear more? History shows us that spiritual awakenings often begin in silence. Before every major movement, there is a quiet season where nothing seems to happen. Before Jesus began His ministry, He spent 40 days in the wilderness. Before Paul changed the world, he disappeared into obscurity. Before resurrection, there was a tomb. Before light, there was darkness. Silence is not the opposite of movement. Silence is the womb of movement. When God is silent, fear grows loud. Doubt speaks clearly. Anxiety fills the gaps. But not every thought deserves authority. Silence tests discernment. It asks a powerful question: will you trust what you know, or will you abandon it because you no longer feel it? Faith that survives silence becomes unbreakable because it is no longer dependent on circumstances. Some people say silence means God is testing you. Others say silence means God is teaching you. But perhaps silence means God is trusting you. Trusting you to walk without signs. Trusting you to love without proof. Trusting you to believe without evidence. Trusting you to grow beyond needing constant reassurance. At the deepest level, silence confronts the illusion of control. Humans want timelines, explanations, and guarantees. Silence removes all three. And yet, life itself unfolds without explanation. You do not control your heartbeat. You do not command the sunrise. You do not orchestrate every moment of existence. Silence humbles the ego and awakens surrender. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is alignment. Here is another surprising truth. Many people find God most clearly not when answers arrive, but when expectations collapse. When prayers change from "fix this" to "walk with me." When demands turn into trust. When faith stops negotiating and starts resting. Silence reshapes the relationship from transaction into connection. If you are in a season where God feels silent, you are not broken. You are not forgotten. You are not unworthy. You are not behind. You are standing in sacred territory where growth is invisible but inevitable. Silence does not mean nothing is happening. Silence means something too deep for words is unfolding. So the next time heaven feels quiet, ask yourself a different question. Not "why is God silent?" but "what is being formed in me right now?" Not "what am I missing?" but "what am I becoming?" Because sometimes, the loudest proof of divine presence is not a voice from the sky, but the strength growing within you while you wait. And maybe, just maybe, the silence you fear today will become the foundation of the faith that carries you tomorrow. There are moments in life when heaven feels quiet, when prayers rise from your chest with sincerity and urgency yet return without answers, when you search for God not in rebellion but in desperation, and all you meet is silence. Not anger, not correction, not guidance, just silence. And in that silence, a terrifying thought begins to whisper: what if God has stopped listening? What if He has turned His face away? What if the promises you believed were real for others, but not for you? Scripture never hides this struggle. It does not romanticize faith as constant clarity or unbroken joy. Instead, it records the cries of faithful men and women who felt unheard, unseen, and abandoned, not because they lacked faith, but because their faith was real enough to feel the ache of unanswered prayer. David, a man after God's own heart, asked again and again why God was silent while enemies thrived. Job remained righteous yet sat in ashes with no explanation. Jeremiah wept until he was called the weeping prophet. Silence is not the exception in the life of faith. Silence is part of the journey. When Jesus stood at the tomb of Lazarus, He did not rush to fix what everyone else thought was urgent. He waited. He allowed death to settle. He allowed grief to deepen. He allowed questions to form. And when He finally spoke, it was not just to restore life, but to reveal glory. God's timing often feels cruel when we are inside it, yet perfect when we look back. What feels like divine delay is often divine depth. One of the most unsettling truths about faith is that God rarely explains Himself in advance. He does not give roadmaps. He gives promises. He does not eliminate uncertainty. He asks for trust. Silence tests whether we are following God for His presence or only for His provision. It reveals whether our faith is rooted in who He is or what we hope He will do. There is a reason Scripture says that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. If faith required constant reassurance, it would not be faith. It would be sight. And yet, when silence arrives, many believers interpret it as failure, rejection, or punishment. But the Bible never equates silence with abandonment. In fact, some of God's greatest works were accomplished during seasons when He said almost nothing. Think about Joseph. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. Years passed without a single recorded word from God to him. No vision. No dream. No explanation. Yet God was orchestrating events beyond Joseph's awareness, aligning nations, preserving generations, and shaping a leader who would not have been ready without the silence. Silence did not mean inactivity. Silence meant preparation. Psychologically, humans fear silence because it removes predictability. The brain craves closure, clarity, and control. Silence leaves space for anxiety to grow. But spiritually, silence serves a different purpose. It strips away dependence on feelings and replaces it with obedience. It forces faith to stand on truth rather than emotion. Many believers feel closest to God when worship is easy and prayers are answered quickly, but intimacy deepens when obedience continues even when reassurance disappears. Jesus himself experienced divine silence. In Gethsemane, he prayed with anguish so intense that his sweat became like drops of blood. He asked if the cup could pass, yet heaven did not intervene. On the cross, he cried out words that echo through history, asking why he had been forsaken. If silence meant abandonment, then the cross would be proof of failure. Instead, it became the greatest victory humanity has ever known. Silence preceded resurrection. Here is something most people never consider. God's silence often protects us from answers we are not yet prepared to receive. Some truths would crush us if revealed too early. Some outcomes would destroy our faith if unfolded before our character was ready to carry them. Just as a child cannot understand adult responsibilities, a growing believer cannot always comprehend divine strategy. Silence is sometimes mercy disguised as absence. Throughout the Bible, God speaks most clearly after extended waiting. Abraham waited decades for a promise. Moses waited in obscurity before leadership. Israel waited centuries for a Messiah. Waiting did not weaken the promise. It purified it. Waiting removed entitlement and built dependence. Waiting revealed whether people would trust God's word or demand God's proof. Silence exposes motives. When God feels quiet, we are forced to confront why we believed in the first place. Was it comfort? Was it certainty? Was it blessing? Or was it love? True faith does not disappear when silence arrives. It either deepens or reveals where it was shallow. And this is not condemnation. It is invitation. There is a spiritual paradox few people understand. God often feels closest when he feels furthest away. Not because he has moved, but because our awareness is being refined. Silence sharpens discernment. It trains the soul to recognize God beyond emotions and circumstances. When noise fades, truth becomes clearer. Silence is where idols are exposed. When God no longer answers on demand, we discover what we truly rely on. Comfort, validation, success, approval, control. Silence removes substitutes until only God remains. That process is painful, but it is holy. Even nature reflects this truth. Seeds grow in darkness. Roots deepen underground. Storms strengthen trees. Muscles grow through resistance. Nothing strong is formed without tension. Nothing lasting is built without waiting. Silence is spiritual resistance training. Many people ask God for direction while refusing stillness. Yet Scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is not inactivity. Stillness is surrender. It is the posture that acknowledges God is working even when evidence is absent. Faith does not demand to see before it believes. Faith believes even when it cannot see. When God is silent, it does not mean your prayers are ineffective. It may mean your prayers are being answered in ways you cannot yet recognize. Not every answer arrives as relief. Some arrive as strength. Some arrive as endurance. Some arrive as transformation. The enemy uses silence to plant lies. Lies that say you are forgotten. Lies that say you are unworthy. Lies that say your faith is weak. But God uses silence to build truth. Truth that says your identity is not dependent on outcomes. Truth that says your worth is not measured by answers. Truth that says faithfulness matters even when clarity does not exist. Silence teaches patience, and patience shapes humility. Humility produces obedience. Obedience produces trust. And trust allows God to move in ways certainty never could. A faith that has never wrestled with silence is fragile. A faith that survives silence is unshakable. One day, you may look back on the season where God felt quiet and realize it was the moment your faith stopped being borrowed and became your own. The moment belief matured into conviction. The moment you stopped needing constant confirmation and learned to walk by trust. If God is silent in your life right now, do not rush to fill the quiet with conclusions. Do not interpret silence as rejection. Do not abandon faith because comfort is missing. God does not waste silence. He uses it to draw you deeper than answers ever could. And when He speaks again, and He will, you may discover that the silence was never empty at all. It was filled with unseen work, hidden growth, and a faith being forged strong enough to carry the future God has prepared for you. There comes a moment in almost every life when the universe feels quiet, when the questions keep forming but the answers never arrive, when you reach outward hoping for a sign and encounter nothing but stillness. It is unsettling because silence feels like rejection, like absence, like being forgotten. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to wonder if the silence itself means something has gone wrong. But what if silence is not the problem? What if silence is the message? Human beings are conditioned to believe that meaning arrives through noise. Through words, instructions, confirmations, feedback. From the time we are young, reassurance becomes our compass. When reassurance disappears, panic often follows. The mind fills the void with fear because it does not know how to exist without direction. And yet, across every ancient wisdom tradition, silence was never feared. It was revered. Silence was considered the space where truth finally had room to surface. Modern science offers a fascinating parallel. Studies on the human brain show that when external stimulation decreases, the mind enters a state of deep integration. This is where memory consolidates, identity restructures, and emotional patterns reorganize. What feels like nothing happening is often when the most important inner work begins. Transformation rarely announces itself. It unfolds quietly. Silence has a way of dismantling illusions. When there are no immediate answers, no clear outcomes, no guarantees, the false layers of identity begin to fall away. You can no longer hide behind productivity, approval, or certainty. You are left with yourself. And that confrontation can feel terrifying. but it can also be liberating. Because for the first time, you are not distracted from what is real. Many people assume that growth should feel empowering from the start, but growth often begins as discomfort. Just like muscles ache before they strengthen, just like bones reshape under pressure, the inner self evolves through tension. Silence applies that pressure. It removes external validation and forces internal alignment. You begin to notice what you truly believe when no one is affirming it for you. Here is something most people never consider. Silence does not mean nothing is happening. In physics, even empty space vibrates with unseen energy. In music, silence is what gives notes meaning. Without pauses, sound becomes chaos. In nature, the most critical processes happen quietly. Roots grow underground. Seeds break open in darkness. The loudest transformations begin where no one is watching. There is a psychological phenomenon known as uncertainty intolerance. The human mind struggles when outcomes are unknown. It prefers a painful certainty over a peaceful unknown. Silence places you directly inside the unknown. And this is where the deepest inner evolution occurs. Not because the silence is comfortable, but because it forces surrender. Control dissolves. Ego weakens. Awareness sharpens. Spiritual traditions across the world have pointed to this same truth in different language. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence without form. It is the field where insight emerges rather than being imposed. It is the space where wisdom rises instead of being delivered. When everything external goes quiet, something internal begins to speak. But the voice that emerges in silence is subtle. It does not shout. It does not demand. It does not threaten. It invites. And many miss it because they are waiting for something dramatic. Silence teaches discernment. It trains you to recognize truth without spectacle. It asks you to listen with something deeper than your ears. One of the most uncomfortable realizations silence brings is this: you cannot control the timing of your life. You cannot force clarity. You cannot rush understanding. You cannot negotiate transformation. The mind resists this fiercely because control feels like safety. But safety built on control is fragile. Silence dismantles false safety so real stability can form. There is a reason people who have walked through deep uncertainty often emerge calmer, wiser, and less reactive. They have faced the unknown and survived it. Silence matures the nervous system. It teaches patience. It expands tolerance for ambiguity. It shifts identity from "I need answers to be okay" into "I can remain grounded even when answers are absent." Many individuals abandon their inner path during silence because they mistake stillness for stagnation. But stagnation feels heavy. Silence feels spacious. There is a difference. Stagnation traps. Silence opens. Silence does not push you forward, but it widens you. It prepares you to receive what would otherwise overwhelm you. Think about how identity forms. Most people define themselves by what they do, what they achieve, what others say about them. Silence removes those reference points. Without feedback, without applause, without comparison, you are asked to exist without performance. That is where authenticity begins. Not when you are seen, but when you are unseen. Silence also reveals attachment. When outcomes matter more than alignment, silence feels unbearable. When purpose matters more than results, silence becomes tolerable. And when truth matters more than certainty, silence becomes sacred. There is a quiet intelligence that moves through life, shaping events beyond conscious planning. You see it in chance meetings, unexpected delays, missed opportunities that later reveal protection. Silence is often the space where this intelligence rearranges things outside your awareness. Intervention does not always look like interruption. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Here is another unsettling truth. Some answers never arrive in words. They arrive as understanding. Some clarity does not come as explanation but as peace. Some guidance does not tell you where to go but strengthens you to walk without knowing. Silence teaches you how to trust your inner compass instead of external confirmation. It dissolves the habit of outsourcing meaning. It turns faith inward, not as belief in an idea, but as confidence in alignment. You stop asking, "What should happen next?" and start asking, "Am I moving in integrity right now?" In silence, the nervous system recalibrates. The mind slows. The heart speaks. And often, buried emotions surface. Grief. Fear. Longing. Old wounds. Silence does not create these feelings. It reveals them. And what is revealed can finally be healed. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. Because it removes distraction. But discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is transition. It is the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. If you are in a season where nothing seems to respond, where guidance feels absent, where the universe feels quiet, consider this possibility. You are not being ignored. You are being initiated into a deeper level of awareness. Silence is not asking you to give up. It is asking you to listen differently. To stop demanding signs and start noticing shifts. To stop chasing certainty and start cultivating presence. To trust that growth is happening even when evidence is subtle. And one day, without announcement, you will realize that the silence changed you. Not by giving answers, but by reshaping the one who was asking. There comes a moment in life when the prayers soften into whispers, when the universe feels distant, when the heart keeps reaching outward and finds nothing but silence. Not anger. Not rejection. Just quiet. And in that quiet, something unsettling happens. The mind starts asking questions it was never brave enough to ask before. Is anyone listening? Did I miss something? Did I do something wrong? Or is this silence itself part of the path I was always meant to walk? Across scripture, across ancient wisdom, across human experience, silence has always appeared at the most critical moments. Before revelation. Before awakening. Before transformation. The Bible tells stories of people who trusted deeply and yet heard nothing for long stretches of time. At the same time, spiritual traditions across the world speak of silence as the doorway to truth. Psychology tells us the human mind resists uncertainty more than pain. These three paths converge on the same insight: silence is not empty. Silence is active. In the Christian story, silence often arrives just before something sacred unfolds. Abraham waited decades for a promise to manifest. Joseph lived years in confusion, betrayal, and imprisonment with no explanation. David cried out in psalms that sounded more like questions than praise. Even Jesus stepped into the wilderness where no comforting voice guided him moment by moment. If silence were a sign of abandonment, these lives would make no sense. But if silence is preparation, everything begins to align. Universally, silence is the great teacher because it removes the illusion of control. Humans are conditioned to believe clarity equals safety. We crave answers, timelines, reassurance. When these disappear, fear rushes in to fill the gap. The brain begins scanning for danger, for meaning, for certainty. Yet neuroscience reveals something surprising. When external input decreases, the mind enters a state where deep restructuring occurs. Identity reshapes. Emotional patterns reorganize. What feels like nothing happening is often when everything changes. Spiritually, silence strips faith of its training wheels. It forces belief to stand without emotional reinforcement. It asks whether trust can survive without constant confirmation. In Christianity, faith is defined as trust in what is unseen. In universal spirituality, it is alignment without guarantees. In psychology, it is resilience in uncertainty. Different languages, same truth. Silence exposes motives gently but honestly. When guidance fades, we begin to notice why we were seeking it in the first place. Was it love or security? Was it truth or comfort? Was it surrender or control? Silence does not condemn these questions. It invites them. Because only what is examined can mature. There is something deeply uncomfortable about being unseen. Silence removes applause, validation, and feedback. You are no longer affirmed by outcomes or reactions. You simply exist. And this is where authenticity is born. Not when you are praised, but when you are faithful without witnesses. Not when clarity is loud, but when conviction remains steady and quiet. Jesus on the cross voiced the most human question imaginable, asking why he felt forsaken. From the outside, it looked like divine absence. From eternity's perspective, it was divine fulfillment. Silence did not cancel the mission. It completed it. This mirrors the human experience in a profound way. What feels like abandonment in the moment often reveals meaning only later. From a universal perspective, life itself unfolds without constant explanation. You did not ask your heart to beat. You did not instruct cells to divide. You do not manage gravity or breath consciously. There is intelligence at work beyond awareness. Silence may simply be the moment you are no longer interfering with it. Psychologically, silence forces unresolved emotions to surface. Grief you avoided. Fear you suppressed. Longing you ignored. Silence does not create these feelings. It reveals them. Healing rarely happens while distracted. It happens when you finally sit with what you have been running from. This is why silence feels heavy at first. But wait is not punishment. Wait is resistance, and resistance builds strength. There is a paradox hidden inside spiritual growth. The closer you move toward truth, the less dramatic it becomes. Fireworks belong to beginnings. Depth belongs to stillness. Noise draws attention. Silence builds foundation. A shallow faith demands constant signs. A mature faith can wait without collapsing. In every tradition, silence is associated with listening. Not listening for instructions, but listening for alignment. Not listening for answers, but listening for clarity of being. Silence trains discernment. It teaches you how to recognize what resonates as true rather than what simply sounds comforting. One of the most freeing realizations silence brings is this: you are not responsible for forcing meaning into existence. Meaning unfolds when you stop resisting the unknown. Control relaxes. Trust strengthens. Identity shifts from "I need to know" to "I am willing to walk." When silence lingers, the temptation is to interpret it as failure. But failure feels final. Silence feels open. Silence holds potential. Silence is not a wall. It is a threshold. A space between who you were and who you are becoming. Christian faith teaches that God works even when unseen. Universal spirituality teaches that growth happens beneath the surface. Psychology teaches that the nervous system stabilizes through exposure to uncertainty. All three point to the same conclusion. Silence is not wasted time. It is formative time. You are not behind because clarity has not arrived. You are not forgotten because answers are delayed. You are not weak because certainty feels distant. You are learning how to trust without guarantees, how to love without conditions, how to move without a map. And one day, often without warning, the silence will make sense. Not because everything is explained, but because you have changed. The one who needed constant reassurance no longer exists. In their place stands someone grounded, aware, and unshaken. The silence did not abandon you. It shaped you. And as this silence slowly loosens its grip, something gentle begins to take place inside you. You realize that you did not survive this quiet season by accident. You were held, even when you could not feel it. Guided, even when you could not see it. Strengthened, even when you thought you were breaking. The questions that once haunted you no longer demand answers. They soften into understanding. You begin to see that the silence was never empty space, but sacred ground where your faith stopped being borrowed and became personal, where your hope stopped depending on outcomes and began resting in trust. You learn something quietly powerful. Not every season is meant to be understood immediately. Some seasons are meant to be lived through with courage, patience, and humility. And when clarity finally arrives, it does not arrive as noise or spectacle. It arrives as peace. As calm. As a deep knowing that you are not the same person who first entered the silence. You are steadier now. Kinder. More aware. More rooted. The waiting did not weaken you. It refined you. If this message spoke to something inside your heart, if you felt seen, understood, or comforted in even the smallest way, remember that you are not alone on this journey. There are countless souls walking through quiet seasons right now, wondering if their silence has meaning. By liking this video, you help this message reach someone who may desperately need reassurance today. By sharing it, you become part of someone else's healing without ever knowing their name. And by subscribing to this channel, you choose to walk this path of hope, reflection, and inner growth together, video by video, moment by moment. This channel exists to remind you that even in the quiet, you are growing. Even in the waiting, you are becoming. Even in the silence, something beautiful is unfolding within you. Stay here. Stay connected. Stay open. There are more stories to share, more truths to explore, and more light waiting ahead. And no matter how silent the season may feel, you never have to walk it alone. Jesus' teaching on the experience, often described as "when God feels silent," is not given as a single sermon or rule, but it is revealed very clearly through his words, actions, and his own life. When you place all of it together, a powerful message emerges. Jesus teaches that silence does not mean abandonment. In the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly shows that God can be fully present even when he appears quiet. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed with intense emotion, asking for the suffering ahead to be taken away, yet no audible answer came. Heaven did not interrupt the pain. Still, Jesus did not interpret the silence as rejection. Instead, he surrendered, saying not his will, but God's will be done. This shows that silence is sometimes the space where trust is proven, not where love is removed. Jesus also teaches that faith is deeper than feelings. Again and again, he calls people to believe without demanding constant signs. He tells his followers that blessed are those who believe without seeing. This directly speaks to seasons of silence. Jesus is teaching that faith matures when it is no longer dependent on emotional reassurance or immediate answers. Silence exposes whether belief is rooted in truth or comfort. On the cross, Jesus voices one of the most human cries ever recorded, asking why he feels forsaken. This moment is central to understanding his teaching. Jesus does not hide the experience of divine silence, he enters it fully. Yet the resurrection reveals the meaning. God was not absent. He was working beyond visibility. Through this, Jesus teaches that God may be silent at the surface while accomplishing something eternal beneath it. Jesus' life also shows that waiting is not wasted. Before beginning his public ministry, he spent years in obscurity and then 40 days in the wilderness with no encouragement, applause, or visible success. These quiet seasons shaped his obedience, clarity, and authority. His teaching implies that silence is often preparation for purpose. Another key lesson from Jesus is that God's work is not always immediate, but it is always intentional. When Lazarus was sick, Jesus delayed going to him, even though he loved him. The silence felt painful and confusing to those waiting. Yet Jesus explains that the delay was for a greater revelation of God's glory. This shows that silence can serve a higher purpose than instant relief. At the heart of Jesus' teaching is this truth: God's presence is not measured by noise or answers, but by faithfulness. Jesus invites his followers to trust the Father even when outcomes are unclear, to obey even when guidance feels distant, and to remain faithful even when reassurance is absent. In simple terms, Jesus teaches that when God feels silent, it is not because he has left. It is because he is calling believers into deeper trust, stronger faith, and a relationship no longer dependent on constant confirmation. Silence, in Jesus' teaching, is not the end of faith. It is the place where faith becomes real. Jesus continues this teaching by showing that relationship matters more than explanation. He never promises his followers that they will always understand what God is doing. Instead, he promises that they will never be alone while God is doing it. When he tells his disciples, "I am with you always," he does not attach conditions like clarity, comfort, or success. Presence is assured even when understanding is not. This reframes silence completely. Silence is not the withdrawal of presence, it is the absence of explanation. Jesus also teaches that obedience during silence carries great spiritual weight. Many of his instructions were given without immediate reward or visible outcome. He asked Peter to cast the net again after failure. He asked the blind man to wash before seeing. He asked servants to fill jars with water before wine appeared. These moments reveal a pattern. God often asks for trust-filled action before revelation. Silence tests whether obedience depends on understanding or on trust. Another profound aspect of Jesus' teaching is that God's silence can protect the heart. Jesus often refused to answer questions that came from wrong motives. He stayed silent before accusations, before mockery, and before power that demanded proof. His silence was not weakness, it was wisdom. Through this, he teaches that not every demand deserves an answer and not every silence is meant to be broken. Sometimes silence preserves truth until the heart is ready. Jesus also shows that love remains active even when God seems quiet. On the cross, while experiencing silence, Jesus still forgave, still loved, still surrendered. This teaches that faith does not pause when silence arrives. Love continues. Trust continues. Purpose continues. Silence does not excuse bitterness or withdrawal. Instead, it becomes the place where love proves its depth. Perhaps the most comforting part of Jesus' teaching is this: God sees the silent suffering of the faithful. Jesus constantly noticed those overlooked by society, the quiet sufferers, the unnoticed faithful. His compassion assures that silence does not mean invisibility. God is deeply aware of every tear, every unanswered prayer, every quiet act of trust. Ultimately, Jesus teaches that silence is not the enemy of faith. Fear is. Despair is. Giving up is. Silence, when met with trust, becomes a doorway to deeper intimacy with God. It shifts faith from seeking signs to resting in relationship. So when God feels silent, Jesus' life and teaching offer a steady truth: stay faithful, stay loving, stay trusting. The silence will not last forever, but what it produces within you will. Silence, in Jesus' teaching, is not where faith dies. It is where faith grows strong enough to endure anything.